Hello and welcome to Postgres FM, a weekly show about all things PostgreSQL. I'm Michael, founder of PG Mustard. This is my co-host Nikolai, founder of Postgres AI. Hey Nikolai, what are we talking about today?
Hi, Michael. It's your turn. Tell us, please. What's the topic?
Flip it on me. Yes, I picked this one. I think we're going to call it row estimates, but this is
Rose.
based on. So this is about the planner, query planner, and this is again based on a listener suggestion or request. They didn't ask about this specifically, but they did ask about nested loops causing performance issues. And looking at any one particular performance issue would be quite a dull podcast, I think, but maybe a better video. But it really, a lot of these, especially when it comes to people thinking that the nested loop is the problem, it's normally due to a bad row estimate or an inaccurate row estimate at some point and a bad planner choice based on that row estimate. So I wanted to dive into how Postgres is making those decisions, and also some things that we can do as users to help it get better statistics and to help guide it in the right direction, or not, things that we don't have at our disposal at the moment that other databases do. So that's the kind of thing I was hoping to talk about.
Sounds good, but what's wrong with nested loops? They're good.
Yeah, and this is the reason I didn't want to call this, nested loops causing issues. It's mostly
Right.
So what's wrong with them is a good point. I think it's about trade-offs, right? So the reason we have a lot of the time the planner has multiple choices for the join algorithm it chooses, and even the scans that it does. So it's not even just about joins. It has a lot of choices and different options, and because SQL's declarative, it can make its mind up about the fastest or most efficient way to do that. Nested loops have some real advantages. They're very quick to get started. They're very flexible. They can be used in a lot of different cases. But when the two relations that are being joined get large, there can be more efficient or quicker ways of joining those. In Postgres, we have hash joins and we have merge joins. I think that's it.
Yeah,
For the join
three
algorithms.
algorithms. Yeah. So nested loops are good when the relation on one side is smaller, quite small, right? A low number of rows on one side.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Both sides, one side, and if even if one side's large, if it's indexed, a nested loop can still be really good, right?
And if they are both quite large, nested loop probably it's not a good idea to have it.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll probably be better off with a hash join, or in some cases, if they're both sorted, a merge join, I guess. But sometimes we don't have those options, right? Sometimes if we're not doing a quality operation, I think there. But equally, when people are looking into this, if there's a good plan and a bad plan, that's often when people think it's the nested loop that's the problem. There was another option, right? There was a better plan, a better path that could have been chosen but wasn't, because it was being scored higher, or the costs were estimated to be higher. A big input for those costs is how many, I'm going to say rows, I guess this might be another argument for tuples, are being returned at each, or tuples, sorry.
Tuples.
You're back to that old one.
Yeah, your version is tuples. I proposed tuples, but you switched. Okay, so if we see nested loop and we think it should be different, we suspect some issues with statistics, right? And first thing to check is to try to analyze the table to recollect statistics, or no? What do you think?
Well, this is, I think, where we get into, it's probably worth us explaining up top, analyze. I guess what you're talking about there is the process Postgres has for gathering statistics. So you can
Right.
analyze a relation. I learned today, actually, looking into it, you can analyze just a single column. And there's a lot of flexibility there.
Or expression, actually.
Nice. Okay, cool. And also it happens automatically as part of auto vacuum or auto analyze, I guess, is the part of that.
Well, yeah, auto vacuum has three tasks.
Yeah.
So vacuuming, preventing transaction ID wraparounds or freezing, and also third option is auto analyzing, like recollecting statistics. And yes, this
maybe 4.
What was fourth?
Does the visibility map count as separate?
Well, yeah, but it can be considered as a part of vacuuming.
Okay,
So,
cool.
Maintaining free space map and visibility map. But when analyzing may happen together with auto vacuuming, but it may happen also like auto analyzing separately. So everything happens inside Postgres, right? Many options, but right. So not every time AutoVacuum runs to process some table, it recollects statistics. It's controlled by several settings, threshold, scale factor, related to analyze part. And,
and I think it's fairly recent. I didn't actually check, but one of the newer versions lets us set an analyze scale factor even for insert only workloads. So times where
there was a problem. Yeah. There was a problem for append-only use cases when you just add a lot of data and that's it. And this AutoVacuum didn't process it. Vacuuming probably is not needed because you don't produce delete tuples if you just insert, right? But analyzing, recollecting statistics is definitely what I would like to have. And actually, for example, many examples, educational examples and so on, they show like, okay, let's load something to table, and before you must run analyze yourself to have proper plans. But now you can just wait a little bit, right? And AutoVacuum will do its job, and then you can play with it. But of course, if you want to control, probably you just need to say analyze table name, and that's it, right?
Yep. So actually, the reason I wanted to
Postgres 11 or 12 when it was like a couple of versions ago, maybe 3 versions ago.
Wow, that's getting quite a long time ago. I remember when that was new, me.
I remember Darafei, I cannot pronounce the last name, sorry. Darafei participated in this discussion and he was active in Russian-speaking community as well. So I remember this case, and it was quite like so obvious improvement. Like it was like one of those changes when you have feeling how come it didn't happen before, right?
Yep. But that's the nice thing. It does keep getting better. And the reason I wanted to be specific about the analyze you were talking about there is that there's a few places people might see that word. And there's analyze itself as a keyword that gathers statistics. You might see vacuum analyze as like a kind of parameter to vacuum. That is the same thing. So that's doing both vacuum and analyze. But you might also see explain analyze, which I guess we're going to talk about in a moment, which is not related at all, just totally different thing. So naming things is difficult, and sadly, that's just one we need to like. Once you know what it does, you realize it's unrelated, but it can be confusing for beginners.
Right, terms, words are overloaded everywhere. Statistics term is also overloaded. We can talk about double statistics and usage statistics. This statistics, PG statistic, which collects, which keeps the column and expression stats, and this is what is recalculated when you run analyze. And also in the explain plan, we also see some statistics, right? We can also call it some. So like the terms are overloaded indeed. There are too few words in language, unfortunately, in any language. Limited number of words, unfortunately. But okay, so you say like back to our topic. We if we see nested loop and we say we would like to have something else like a hash join probably, we just need to check it with analyze. Like what would you do? Like just run analyze and double check the plan, or what?
Yeah, so so I think goes back a step. How are you even spotting that problem? I would suggest that you should be running explain analyze and trying to work.
Buffers.
So that's Explain, analyze buffers. Yeah, ideally,
course.
maybe even verbose format JSON. Maybe no.
On Twitter, there was a new saying like, "In buffers we trust."
I like it.
Right.
I think I saw you had a T-shirt like that as well, so that's fun.
Yep. So when explain analyze buffers to check it before you run analyze to recollect statistics.
Yeah, but specifically, explain alone won't help us here because explain alone only gives us the estimated number of rows being returned at each stage of the execution plan. But with explain analyze buffers, but explain analyze is the important part for this topic because that will give us not only the estimated number of rows but also the actual number of rows being returned, and it's mismatches there that can really help us diagnose where this problem's arising, where the bad estimates are. So yeah, that would be my first.
Let me disagree with you here.
Oh.
At least partially. You're talking about like straightforward examples when we can run explain analyze buffers, so we see all details both for planning and execution, and we understand something is wrong. We don't want to have a nested loop here. But what if our execution takes 100 years?
Yeah, of course.
So if you say like just explain is not helpful, it's still helpful. It will show nested loop. It will give us understanding how planner thinks about our data, and we know our data, right? We know how many rows there and there. So we say like, no, I would, if I were you, the planner, right? I would do it differently. So just explain in some cases, it also can be helpful, right? In some extreme cases when execution is long.
Very, very good point. Yeah, completely agree. So yeah, so that's, yeah. But then I agree with you about the second port of call. It's often if you can see the relations involved and you can run and you think maybe analyze hasn't run recently on those, and you can just it's not a locking operator, or it has very, very light locks, so you can run analyze on tables in production or columns even with very low risk, and that might be enough to solve your problem. It might be that the statistics are out of date.
Yeah, we can check. We can check how when analyze ran in logs if AutoVacuum is logging is enabled, and in recent versions threshold is 10 minutes. It should be 0 always, 0 0. Like everything, all rows, all and log entries related to AutoVacuum should be there, in my opinion. But we also have pgstat all tables, pgstat user tables, and we can check. It has four columns, 2 pairs, 1 pair for vacuuming and 1 pair for timestamps. All pairs are timestamps. I'm not talking about count. Count is quite silly metric, right? So okay, 5 now, 5 times. Well, 0 means something, but 5, 10 when, right? So 2 pairs of timestamps, 1 pair for vacuum, 1 is for auto vacuum, 1 is for manual vacuum, and two timestamps for analyze. 1 for auto analyze, means like analyze job of auto vacuum, and second is for manual analyze. And we can see when it happened, right? It might still be happening, so also worth checking pgstat activity. And you will see it there, AutoVacuum colon analyze or vacuum analyze. So you can...
Yeah, good point. It could be happening right now.
In pgstat activity, the query column, it has details for AutoVacuum jobs as well. So it's seen as regular session.
What's the, like, on huge databases, how long do you tend to see analyze taking?
Hours. Well, it depends on how detailed you want your statistics to be. By default, we have default statistics target 100, like meaning 100 buckets, but many people increase it, for example, to 1,000, sometimes more. And the bigger default statistics target is, the longer analyze will be, and it will produce significant noticeable disk I/O, of course, reading data if it's not cached in the buffer pool and or cache. And also individual columns can be tuned. So default statistics target, it's like cluster-wide setting, but some columns can be adjusted additionally with alter table. I don't remember, like
statistics,
something like that. You can say I want 1,000 buckets here, but 100 buckets there, and only 10 there. Something like this. It's like fine-tuning. Usually, I recommend like avoid it unless you're 100% no. In my experience, I saw cases when people tuned it, but they didn't were not very clear in their intentions. It was like kind of experimenting, and then it was abandoned, and then you just have some leftover of past experiments. That's it. So systematic approach should be like what you're doing, and here we definitely want more detailed statistics. So analyze it depends on table size and on number of buckets you want to collect for each expression or column.
Yeah, so that's, in fact, going on to the statistics target, I think that's a useful next. So if analyze doesn't fix your problem, there's something interesting. If you're aware now where the problem is, then if you know the distribution of that data, if you've got a very skewed distribution, that's where I see extending, or so increasing that target. Well, I don't know if I have the same opinion as you. I personally don't think it's as sensible to change the global statistics target from like increasing it from 100 to 1,000. But I've seen some people have success with doing it at with specific columns that they know are distributed a certain way.
Before I started to work with thin cloning, I worked on the holistic approach to this problem. So, for example, you say, okay, I have my database, I have many clones of it, and I have my workload. I can reproduce it reliably, like definitely can do it, at least part of it, right? And then we were able to run, for example, 10 VMs in parallel. We can do it sequentially, of course, but if we can do it in parallel, why not? By the way, there will be a question: do we have the same hardware everywhere? So we also added some micro benchmarks to compare, like baseline CPU same, disk same, and so on. But parallelization of benchmarks is quite interesting topic itself. So, and then you just compare. You take 10 values for your knob, in this case default statistics target, and then you compare many things. For example, starting from regular latencies and throughput, you can also use PG statements to analyze particular query groups and see deviations. And it's very this is very good holistic approach. By the way, it's also possible to do it for using thin clones, but you need to focus, of course, on buffers, not on timing, because timing will be quite volatile metric, but buffers will be reliable. So it's possible to do something there and see how amount of work in terms of I/O, so buffers, will change depending on default statistics target. And in this approach, the goal was, okay, we want to improve queries, and if we change global value, which queries will be improved and which queries maybe will have some penalty, right? Of course, you need to also to compare analyze in this experiment, and this is holistic approach. Quite interesting, actually. If I like this approach. It's like I consider such approaches as enterprise ready, because you answer all questions, cover all topics here, and then you can make decision with a lot of data. But it requires efforts, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
And I haven't seen as many cases where other queries are slowed down in these cases, definitely in other performance cases, but I hadn't considered a really good point you made around the speed of analyze being very dependent on this. And then, that's crucial for things like major version upgrades, because when we do a major version
plans changes.
well, we don't have statistics, do we? We don't get the statistics automatically, so we have to run analyze before we can, like, as part of the downtime. But there's no, I don't see any way around that. So if we've now increased our statistics target to a point where it's going to take half an hour to run analyze across our entire database, then that's another half an hour of downtime every time we do a major version upgrade.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, exactly. So it's considering these other. I hadn't thought so much about that, but that makes me think even more that the kind of more going after each, only increasing on a kind of case by case basis might be more sensible.
Right, and analyzing in stages, I saw cases when it didn't help. So, like, to sit in some intermediate state, it was not good at all. So, conclusion was let's do the last step, like maximum statistics, and just wait more, and that's it. It would be great if Postgres PG upgrade would just export and import PG statistic, understanding changes if they are happen between versions. By the way, back to, like, I remember I wanted to interrupt you in one more place, but I didn't.
Yep.
So you mentioned that if we have issues, probably we need to change this. We started to discuss this default statistics target knob, but maybe this is not. Maybe there is another mitigation action. For example, we can tune auto vacuum to recollect statistics more often.
Yep.
So I would start from there, maybe not from change of number of buckets.
Yeah, well, and it depends a little bit on the problem, right? It depends if it's a distribution issue or if it's a data being a stale issue, or if it's a correlation issue. So there's another.
Before we go there,
go on.
Right. So it's a question. What is it? And the answered question, we need to experiment. That's why I started. Will you do analyze, manual analyze to check it? Right. Okay. We see that AutoVacuum did it yesterday, and we inserted a lot, for example. So obviously we should run manual analyze, right? And double check the plan, compare before and after, right?
I mean, I feel like I want to say yes, but equally I feel like it's a trap.
You feel it, because you know me already, right? But it is trap. It is trap. Well, 99.9% of DBS will do it, and I personally will do it as well. But I don't like it because if I we want to understand what's happening, right? And this is one-way ticket always.
You can't undo it, you mean?
Exactly. So,
but we do then know what the problem was. At least then we know the problem was.
Right, but how can you be 100% sure that you won't have any questions to previous version of statistics? Maybe you have. Maybe you would like to check other plans as well, right? You run analyze, and that's it. Doors closed. Bye bye. It's not good, right? That's why. Guess what? Think clones.
Well, just to question that slightly, if we have a point-in-time recovery, for example, and we then, if we want to, let's say, restore to a previous time before we ran analyze, can we get the old statistics back?
Exactly, yes. The only problem with this approach is just like terabyte per hour.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
That's it. So if you have 10 terabytes, wait 10 hours to try again, and then you run analyze, and that's why I think clones and database lab engine.
Yeah. So I think my answer to your question is still yes. If it's if this is like a production issue, we don't like.
We need to heal us up. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I would. But equally, really good point and worth thinking. Worth taking a split second to think about the consequences before hitting execute.
Oh, by the way, is analyze transactional? In this case, you can detach one of clones, right? Make it
analyze, roll back.
Well, yes, exactly. I think it is because it's just a PG statistics table. It should be, I don't remember 100%, but it should be transactional. So you just begin, analyze, check your plan, roll back. Why not? It should be so.
Cool. Very well. There you go.
Maybe I'm terribly wrong, but
It's a great idea.
should be
Someone
so,
check
should be
it.
so.
Well, one of us will check it, and we'll let people.
In this case, you can iterate and return, basically reset statistics once again and check using regular traditional Postgres, not thin clones, which I like so much. Database branching, becoming buzzword, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We covered it, like how we can play with many different query plans and see how what's happening if we calculate. Now let's talk about correlation. You wanted to talk about it, right?
Well, yeah. I guess we've only covered a couple of the different ways that this could be a problem, and another famous one, I think we have discussed it on here before, is let's say we're looking at two columns that are highly correlated, and by default, Postgres is going to assume. Oh, go on.
Each time I try to invent some example, I'm becoming either racist or sexist or something. I cannot.
Well, I've got a good one for you. Car makes and models, for example. If we say where car make is Toyota and car model is Prius, those are going to be extremely highly correlated.
Right.
But by default, Postgres is, and maybe that's problematic in some case. Sorry if I've offended the Toyota Prius owners out there. But yeah, that's going to be obviously completely correlated. I'm not aware of any Priuses that aren't Toyotas, but by default, Postgres is going to assume that those are independent variables and is going to look at the proportion of rows that are Toyotas, if they're in the most common values, and proportion that are in the Priuses, and work out a much lower estimate of the total than actually the case. So that's probably the best, currently the best use of extended statistics. So we can now, I think, thanks to people like Thomas Vondra, I think there's a few more people involved. As of a few versions ago, we can now we can educate Postgres about these. Yes,
special
exactly.
objects. There are three options, and in this case, I don't remember the words, but like something about distinct values, most common values, and the third is about this one depends on another, right? So functionally dependent or so. In this case, I would choose that third option because obviously Prius means Toyota, so. Probably, and if we don't do that, Postgres just multiplies. We have 20% of Toyotas. Okay, we have 1% of Prius. Multiplication, a very low number. In this case, bad idea, obviously. And also, if our query includes, for example, I don't know, Nissan Prius and Prius, obviously we should have 0, right?
Yep.
But Postgres will tell multiplication will give some non-zero number, also wrong. In this case, definitely. But the question is how to. Okay. I usually try to find some holistic approach, right? How to build some framework. You're right, by the way, that obviously. If we just calculate statistics or we increase number of buckets, none of queries should slow down. It should only help, right?
I think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Right. But the framework, why I talked about it, the framework also asks question, are there any parts of our workload which struggle from our change? This is the idea. We should check everything and ensure that we improved something, but we have everything else at least the same. May not improved, but at least the same. And here I also ask holistic question: how to understand that we need it. We need to guess that this column depends on that, or we can.
Well, based on the query plan, we can often see that that's where a misestimate's happening, right? That's that. I mean, I'm definitely somebody who's guilty of having a hammer and then everything looks like a nail. So that's typically the way I've seen it, but be easier to to spot. So yeah, that would be my point. But where is that the place you'd look as well?
I have just a question, no answers.
Okay.
This time.
Because this is a common issue in query plans, and it's not always clear from the query plan where the issue is. We have a tip in PG Mustard for particularly bad row estimates, especially only when they're part of a slow part of the query plan, a slow subtree. And we link out to a blog post that we've written going through kind of like helping people try this, then try that, or going through basically the things we've discussed here. So I will link it up, but I think I need to update the blog post based on a few things we've mentioned here. So it's a bit, it's a few years old.
Yeah, so I like that you also started to advertise your product, because we invest a lot of efforts to try to help people and to improve things, tooling and so on. I think this Create Statistics it's very, very underrated, because you need to make a lot of efforts to get into there. So if, for example, Explainalyze would suggest, or like if PGMaster suggests more explicitly what to do, more people would start using it, right? So we need some helpers that would do it. Actually, we don't have helpers for indexes, so it's still like there are some works in progress trying to improve and do it, but very interesting questions.
Yeah. Another thing the last thing I wanted to make sure we covered as part of this, it feels odd not to, is that sometimes people get to the end of their tether with this, and maybe Create Statistics doesn't yet support their use case. Like we've talked before about two correlated columns, but from different tables. I think you mentioned quite a good idea using materialized views for that, but if
as a bridge to have an index on columns from different tables, yes. But, well, it's like quite also silly thought, but it's what we have.
Can we do Create Statistics on materialized views? I didn't even think about that. Great. Yes. So that makes sense then.
And even on foreign data wrapper tables, so foreign tables.
Yeah, makes sense. The thing I wanted to mention though is that sometimes people, as a last port of call, or because they've used to using them in previous databases, also would like hints for this. So I know people often talk about index.
Don't mix with hints. Hints, you mean to command the executor what to do, the planner what to choose?
Not necessarily to command them what to do.
Or hints, Postgres says it's time to do that, to create it.
No, I meant...
Regular
no.
Okay, like an order.
Yeah, I did mean regular ones, because I think there's PG Hint Plan that I think one of the things they let you do is give an idea of the number of rows you're expecting from certain things. So I think there's an interesting area there. And I did see a talk by Robert Haas that when somebody asked about hints, he seemed very open to them specifically for row estimates, not for other things. So that was super interesting to me.
Yeah, and the common approach to hints from the core hackers is we don't want them, right? In Postgres, but still people need it sometimes. So I don't have 100% strong opinion here, but let me tell you some small story. We added hints to Database Lab, so Database Lab is non-production, and the idea was to allow people to experiment more and see what if approach, what if plan would be different, and so. But sometime passed, people started to use it. There is comment, okay. People started to ask, okay, it's good. I found better plan. I optimized. Now, why we don't have it on production, right?
Yeah.
And I realized that if you add something to lab, you also need to think if there will be some people that will want the same on production. So and they're already like, okay, should we add it to production? Maybe no, right? Maybe yes. It's there are different opinions here.
Maybe we should do a whole episode on that, actually. That feels like a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Was there anything else you wanted to make sure we covered?
No? Analyze more often.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Nikolai, and see you next week. Or have a good Christmas for everybody who's celebrating.
Thank you. Likewise.